Since changing the name of the Eclectic Americana Friday morning drive time radio show on January 20th, 1989 to the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club, the DJs in the collective have strived to entertain and inform our listeners. Airing from 6 to 9 a.m. Pacific at KZSC 88.1 FM in Santa Cruz, California, the Bushwhackers usually have 2 interviews a week, each airing for about half an hour. We're not afraid to ask questions or admit that we don't know something, and we don't mind taking deep dives or following a tangent as we get into how sausage is made in local, county, or state politics, or learning about things going on in our community, or discussions with artists. Our interviews are not scripted and are produced by myself, Dangerous Dan Orange. John Laird, it's KZSC Santa Cruz. The phone patch through Studio B did not work, but you're joining us now on the air.
Perfect.
Okay, I just have to remember what part of my phone the speakers is on. Is it up? It's up here. John Laird, where are you? Up in Sacramento or down here in the district?
I'm in Sacramento, but that's a story. Yesterday we had a floor session, and I chaired the first education hearing, and then I went to the airport and flew to Burbank and did a fundraising event in Los Angeles and caught the last flight north last night. So I'm getting up to talk to you, and then I'm driving to Monterey.
Fundraising event in Los Angeles. John Laird, your district ends in San Luis Obispo.
It does, but I'm statewide, and there are a lot of people that wanted to help me down there, and it was an amazing group. It was people involved in water, healthcare, hydrogen, climate change, and it was hosted by a former colleague of mine from the state assembly. So it was all good.
So, okay, gotcha. And this was a fundraiser for Senator John Laird.
Yes, it's as hard as it is to believe. The primary in California next year is a year from right now. So we are already heading into the next election cycle, and you will be hearing from me soon that I expect to be on the ballot next year. I'll make an announcement sometime in the next couple of weeks.
So, John Laird, let's talk about, we talk about how sausage is made and kind of the ugly truth of politics. It takes money. Let's dive into that a little bit. Is there any kind of thought of making a large pot of state money available to all candidates and doing away with private fundraising for elected office in California?
There have been some thoughts, and I have actually co-authored any effort, primarily when I was in the assembly, to do it. And there, for example, the city of Los Angeles does the contribution limits, and you get matching funds from the city if you accept the lower contribution limits. And sometimes it doesn't work if there's a wealthy self-funding candidate, because it completely blows the system up. And the real problem was the Citizens United decision that the Supreme Court did 12 or 13 years ago that basically says money is free speech, and therefore you can't limit money in elections, and it blew up the McCain-Feingold finance law and other attempts to do it. And so the real problem is that there are all these attempts to limit money and change it, but people are allowed, billionaires particularly, are allowed to self-fund, and it blows up all those limits regardless of how you put them on. And, for example, we just saw in the Los Angeles mayor's race last November a really wealthy business person, Rick Caruso, put over $100 million of his own money in. And it's a real tribute to Karen Bass's broad-based support that she overcame that and got elected mayor. And so that's the problem. The problem is really that the Supreme Court decisions don't allow for campaign limits that we would all figure out how to support. And that's why the tragedy of the current Supreme Court looms over our whole election system.
Right, Citizens United, which views corporations similarly to humans in that they're able to donate without limit to political action committees, PACs.
Yes, exactly. And to get into a controversial thing, which would probably make my staff have a heart attack.
Go for it.
Well, the thing about it is there's certain kinds of money I don't take. I was one of the first legislators ever to say I'll never take oil money. And obviously I'm not going to take gun money and some other things. But I take some corporate money because it's unilaterally disarming if you don't. There are, last year, the apartment owners put $1 billion into a campaign against Dawn Addis for the assembly on the Central Coast. And here she is, a grassroots fundraiser. And to her credit, they came in so late, and she was so well organized that she beat the candidate that got $1 million by something like 30% of the vote. But the thing that makes a lot of people crazy is I will accept some corporate money, and I don't want to be in a position that I'm vulnerable to the oil companies coming in, and I don't allow it to sway my voting record. My voting record is exactly the way it would have been if I hadn't accepted $1 there. And so those are the difficult issues that are presented by this. There are 4 big interest groups that put in lots of money. Dentists, California Medical Association, realtors, and together with the realtors, the Apartment Association, and the oil companies. And of those 4, I work really well with 3 of them. I carried consumer protection bills for the realtors. I did similar things for the dentists. I did bills to do universal coverage for health for children that the Medical Association supported. I even managed to figure out a way when Arnold Schwarzenegger wanted to limit AIDS drug assistance to people with HIV, to work out a system that allowed for those drugs to be purchased without cutting them off to people with HIV. That ended up making some drug companies happy with me, even though I support limiting their rate of return. So there's, it's a very difficult navigation, and I never want to come home and talk to constituents as if somehow I have sold out to some interest. And so that's the balance. And I think I'm in a good position because I've been doing this for decades, and I have a clear voting record, and people expect it. I think it's really hard these days for somebody running for the first time that isn't well known and doesn't have an extensive voter support network to really establish their independence from some of the interests. We see it in these races.
Now, John, when you talk about receiving funding from different places, this might be something that you're not too keen on perhaps revealing too much of, or your team isn't. But as exact or as inexact terms as you'd like, generally, what's the sense of proportion here? Like, how much of the funding that you receive is from these corporate interests? Like, is it most of it? Is it some of it?
It's some of it, and I am about to, when I announce, I have a mailing list of 5,000 people that have given to me at some point in my political career. And it'll be my goal to have a broad-based grassroots network that is part of this, because that's the best insurance that you will do what's right. And it's always, I remember, she's long gone, but there was a senior activist. Her name was Esther Hagler. She lived to be 100. She was an old-fashioned lefty from New York, and she was on Social Security and lived in Santa Cruz, and she sent me $5 in an election campaign, and that contribution was as important as any I got anywhere else, and I wanted to make sure I never disappointed her in what I did, and that's the important thing. There's a guy that I served with in the assembly who later went to jail for for political stuff. One of the few that happened to in the legislature. And he came into a caucus meeting one day and said, I have a new revolutionary idea for fundraising. You could raise money out of your district. And I just thought, holy crap, who is this guy? And he proved to be that, because he was too cozy and got into deep trouble.
Well, hang on a second, California State Senator John Laird. You just raised money in Los Angeles.
Yes. I raised money in Los Angeles because I am a statewide elected official that deals on statewide things, even though I have 1 million people in a district on the Central Coast that are my first priority. And so, that's an important thing. And I am in leadership statewide. I mean, I am a statewide education leader, a statewide climate change leader. There were people there that support hydrogen.
But John, you just told us about your colleague in the legislature who said something about raising money outside his district.
Yes, but I probably have. Well, no, but that's the only way he raised money. He thought it was revolutionary to do money in the district, and we have a problem in that we don't report. We report the amount we raise in contributions under $100. So you could look and see, okay, I raised $32,000 in contributions under 100, but I'm not sure we report the number. And I know that I will always have more contributions from the district and a significant grassroots level contributions.
One last small question, kind of, again, returning to get a little sense of proportion. These grassroots contributions from, individuals rather than corporate interests, how much of that, funding, how much of your funding do you think that will make up as you continue to focus on that?
I'll be honest, I just don't know. I just know, to me, what's important is the number of donors.
Sure, okay.
When I ran for the Senate last time, I think I had in the neighborhood of 1,000 grassroots donors, which in a Senate campaign is almost unheard of these days. People go for the big ticket stuff. And I'm always anxious to expand that, because that's where you want to rely on things, and that's where, you want to feel like those are the people you want to owe things to.
And just in rough numbers, because like we say, we just get into how sausage is made, what is the rough total budget for a California Senate campaign these days?
It depends, and I'm not ducking the question. It just, is it highly contested? Is it not contested? Is it a safe party district and it's between 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans? And so there were some races last year that were in the 10 or 12 or 14 or $16 million range. I think that when I ran for the Senate last time, 2020, I think I raised $1 million or $1.2 million or something like that for a successful campaign.
Well, you did not duck the question, California State Senator John Laird, and we here at the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club sincerely appreciate it. I'm Dangerous Dan.
I'm Calamity Kyle.
I'm Kaos.
Senator John Laird, there was an article in the Sentinel a couple of weeks ago about housing problems persisting for graduate students, and you were quoted by name. The graduate students are agitating for the UC system in particular to put more money into graduate student housing. Have you looked into this issue, and what are your thoughts on it?
I don't have the breakdown that they have done yet, and yesterday was our first budget hearing, and we will have a budget hearing every Thursday between now and the end of April, except for our brief spring break. And we will have a complete hearing dedicated to the University of California, and I want to pursue it. And to give the background that you just raised, and it's not just graduate students, and that was the point, I think, when I was interviewed, if I recall it right. We did something that had never been done before in the last 2 years. We have put $3.5 billion aside for higher education education housing in California. And for the first time, we included community colleges along with California State University and University of California housing. And we created a revolving loan fund. So technically they are low interest loans, and then they repay it, and so it's an ongoing source of funding for higher education housing. And when this article came up, the question I had is, how does the university split the money it invests in housing between undergraduates and graduate students? And that is what is still unclear to me. So, because right now, the university has historically provided housing for undergraduates, and as they can, they provide housing for graduate students. And in the whole strike and the things that were happening with graduate students, the issue of housing was raised, that it's pretty hard for some people, if they don't have campus housing or other things, to be able to survive on the money that they get to be graduate students that are also teaching. And so I am going to be anxious to look at that breakdown and see, and because and for people, I mean, we're on KZSC, and this is a campus radio station, campus-based radio station, and this has been an issue for undergraduates at Santa Cruz for 40 years. Yep. And when we sued, when I was on the city council in the 1980s, it was for the university to provide more housing. And that's what, they're at 50% or something. And while that's higher than almost any other campus in the percentage of undergraduates for which there are housing units on campus, given the small population of the surrounding area, it overwhelms the housing market, and people are having a rough time finding housing. And that begs the issue of whether it's affordable if they find it. And so that's the reason to provide more housing, is it's not just because it meets students' needs that they're struggling with. It lightens the burden on the surrounding market and the rental market, because if the rental market is so high because students are overwhelming it, it really drives out the ability of other low-income people or working people to rent housing in the region. And so the region's housing opportunities are directly related to how much housing is provided by the university.
You're listening to the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club. We're talking to California State Senator John Laird. John, I appreciate your focus on all things housing. I have friends, undergrads who have gone to showings and realized that they were competing with families to buy housing in Santa Cruz. I talked to Executive Housing Director Dave Keller here at UC Santa Cruz a while back, and he told me it could be different now, but he told me that the vacancy rate in the city of Santa Cruz is under 1% in terms of rentals or in terms of places where people have to live. So a bona fide crisis. I talked to Cynthia LaRive, the Chancellor of UC Santa Cruz, recently, and she actually mentioned that she speaks with you occasionally about sourcing funding for on-campus housing. She mentioned your name directly, and I was like, "Oh, John Laird, I know him from Bushwhackers." But yeah, could you possibly tell us a little bit about your experience of hearing from Cynthia LaRive about on-campus housing here? Specifically, we're working on a project called Student Housing West that has been in the works since, I think it was approved by the Board of Regents in 2019, and now it's kind of going in for a round of budget approval. Could you tell us anything about that?
Well, yeah, that housing project, the history of that makes me crazy. And,
Yeah.
and the reason is that about 150 units of it are on the West Meadow, not the Great Meadow, the West Meadow. And there's been strong opposition from everybody in the universe and the campus community to the housing covering that meadow. And so I have been advocating for 4 years It's like, this is 3,000 units of housing. Take the 150 units and move them with the other 2,850 and end this controversy, because that is what's delayed the construction of this.
Yeah, lawsuits.
And it's been represented that the people are so unreasonable, it's a NIMBY thing, all this crap. And it's like, if they would just fix this, people would have been living in that housing already. And so a few of the regions actually voted against the housing project to try to get them to fix this. And they had a completed environmental report and didn't want to jeopardize the completed environmental report, so they would never switch it. And it kept the opposition going in court and at the regents and everywhere else, and it just drives me crazy. And so then there was a bill that I took some real heat for. Scott Wiener wanted to exempt housing projects at UC and CSU from the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and that made me completely crazy, because we used CEQA over the last 30 years to make the university build housing, and to exempt it on individual projects. I mean, there was this one project that, blanking on his name, he's a really big conservative donor in the universe, and he wanted to build at UC Santa Barbara on the coastal bluff. I think it was 400 units with no windows.
Yeah, they called it Dormzilla.
No windows. And this bill would remove the ability to get at that issue. And as it is, UC is constitutionally exempt from local land use and local taxation, and this just makes it 100% get out of jail free card. If they don't mitigate the water or the transportation, or they want to build a dorm with no windows, there's no process to get at it. And so that just made me completely crazy, and I took some heat from students for voting against that bill. And my point was, that's just a shiny object. You see the shiny object like somehow that's holding up housing, and I'm working to get $3.5 billion in the budget to actually build the housing, which is what's really holding it up, and did that. And now this is coming back to the regents, the Student Housing West, and it's coming back to the regents because they have to figure out what the mechanism is going to be to finance it. Is this a loan? Is this lease revenue bonds? They're still working on that, and there's an outside chance that they have to phase the construction of the project based on how they raise the money. And it's like, could you please just move the 150 units and make all the opposition go away? And so I had a really lively call with local YIMBY advocates last year that was like, oh, they'll find a meadow everywhere. And it was like, come on, just fix this and get the housing built. You know, so, and now with the bill having passed that exempts it, they may well just say, we're just going to pull ahead and build on the meadow. And even the campus architect for many years, Frank Zwart, who is retired, who fronted for every housing project on the university, opposes building on that meadow. And so it's just crazy making. You know, I always want somebody in university leadership that had to run for the city council sometime.
John, when you say NIMBY, you're referring to the phrase "not in my backyard" for those of us who might be unaware.
I was also saying I met with the YIMBYs.
Oh, the YIMBYs.
Yes, in my backyard.
So, that's a new one on me.
So, John Laird, you know, this reminds me of a saying one of my colleagues, Michael Angel, used to say, and that is that, or I used to say to him, sometimes perfection is the enemy of good enough. But my question for you is, are you gaining visibility of this because it's in your district or because you're on the appropriations committee? What aspect of your legislative job?
It's that it's in my district, but also I chair the education budget subcommittee, and so I get it in both those ways.
Got it. Education budget. Well, then it's squarely in your lap.
That's where I was really able to advocate for the $3.5 billion higher education housing money as chair of that committee.
So, John, we've got just a minute or two left. and there was a subject that came up at the last minute last month that I wanted to come back to. You said something about working on the Sierra Conservancy. Does your district extend to the Sierras?
No, but I authored the bill when I was in the assembly to create the Sierra Conservancy because there weren't many people in the Sierra that were elected officials that wanted it at the time. And I ended up making, and I was considered a leading enviro statewide. And so now that turns out, 20 years later, to be very popular in the Sierra. And it's so popular that a few additional areas on the edge of the Sierra want into it. And when that happens, you have to rearrange the areas within it where people sit on the board that are local county supervisors and in some cases city council members. And it is a partnership of economic development, but really environmental protection. And it has really worked, and they have taken a lead on fire prevention and fuels reduction and on wetlands restoration in the Sierra. And that is just a really good thing. And it's very funny because when I was appointed Resources Secretary, everybody said, finally, a coastie. and didn't realize that I had taken a lead on environmental protection in the Sierra.
Well, if that came out of a bill that you submitted when you were in the Assembly, the Sierra Conservancy, what is the bill this time? We've got just a minute.
What happened is it's grown in size a little, and you have to divide it up into areas for representation within it. And the fact that it grew inside knocked out of whack the areas of representation in it, and my bill will fix that.
And that requires legislation to fix?
Yes, because it was originally created in the statute for how it works. So we have to change the statute once we added the areas to fix the internal thing as well.
Well, California State Senator John Laird, we here at the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club love talking to you every month and learning how sausage is made.
Yeah.
It's KZSC Santa Cruz. I'm Dangerous Dan.
I'm Clem Kyle.
I'm Kaos.
And Senator John Laird will talk to you the first Friday of next month at 7:30 in the morning.
Thank you, John.
I'll look forward to it. Take care.
Thanks, John. You've been listening to a podcast from an interview on the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club on KZSC 88.1 FM in Santa Cruz, California. This interview has been produced by myself, Dangerous Dan Orange. KZSC is a student-run college and community non-commercial educational radio station broadcasting from the UC Santa Cruz campus. You can stream KZSC online at kzsc.org. Thanks for listening.